Good morning. I have a talk for you this morning called Power Through Acceptance. So most of these notes come from a book some of you are familiar with called A Course of Love. And it's a book that I use quite a lot. Some call it a sequel to A Course in Miracles, and for me it is. But you know, it's in alignment with everything else, with unity principles, with the right unity writings. And you'll notice at the bottom in large print is a quote from Charles Fillmore. I'll start with that. And that is, man's bodily condition depends on his state of mind. Years do not make a man young or old, for as he thinketh within himself, so is he. So what I want to do is either read or paraphrase this, and then go into some explanation of each part. So this is kind of I'm playing teacher, I guess, on this. So it begins with, and these are all quotes and parts of quotes, acceptance is the key. You can't accept what you fear. All power to affect change comes from acceptance. Not acceptance of the way things are, but acceptance of who you are in the present. What this means is, let's say you have a situation in your life. Let's say you are ill and you're having pain or whatever. And when we say acceptance, there are some teachings, mostly in Eastern religions, that, okay, you just accept it. Okay, this is how it is, I accept it. But what this is saying is, you don't have to accept the illness. What you need to accept is how you feel about it. What you need to accept is who you are being in the midst of this illness. Because that's where the vibration is. Emotion is vibration, and we know that our vibration is what draws experiences to us. And so let's go to the core, to the cause, the vibrational state, which is the emotional state, as opposed to saying, well, I'm sick, I have to accept it. So I'm saying, in addition to whatever physical things you may be doing, prescriptions, doctor appointments, whatever you do, in addition to that is to go within and to take a look at, well, how do I feel about this? What kind of feelings does this raise in me that I'm experiencing this? And to accept those feelings. So why? And I've talked about this before over the years, but I think this is so key to understanding the things that happen to us and helping us to move through them. Sickness is not sickness, but rejected feelings. With this rejection, the feelings became physical. The rejected feelings that became physical were made separate from the self and yet were maintained within the body, thus interrupting the body's natural function, natural means of functioning. The rejected feelings exist as separate and forgotten physical manifestations until they are willfully remembered and accepted back into the spacious self. And so rejected feelings are the ones for which we blame ourselves. So what it's saying is, whenever we are ill or sick, that's just a symptom. The cause is some feeling that we don't want to feel. And it could have been something in our childhood, a trauma. It's like, oh, I don't want to feel that. And so we stuffed it in, and we don't want to think about it anymore, but it's in there. And so it finds a place in your body, and at some point it becomes symptoms. It becomes what we call illness. Now, it would be nice if we all had a real understanding of that, and then we wouldn't really need doctors and medicines and all that stuff, but we don't. So I guess we do need doctors and medicines and things like that, because we have to deal with symptoms, right? We have to deal with our physical reality. But at the same time, we can take a look at what's going on in my consciousness that has helped to create that. And when I go with this kind of talk, I'm not saying that if you're sick, oh, it's your fault, that you thought wrong or whatever. It's not about that, because that is really a false teaching. You do not consciously create illness, and I don't either. It happens because that's just the way this reality is structured. that we have trauma in our lives, we have emotional things that are within us, or if you believe in past lives, things from past lives that are still in us that manifest in our physical body. And so, let's say you're really sick and you have some very big challenges, then I would say that you have taken on a big project for this lifetime, as opposed to thinking, well, I must have really screwed up if I got this. But it's not about screwing up or making a mistake. It's about human life. It's about our journey home, and that this is our adventure. And it might not be a fun adventure if you're sick, especially, or injured, but it's our adventure. If you think of the movies and books that you've been through, and people go through some kind of challenge, and then they have a victory at the end, depending on which kind you watch or read. This is yours. This is your story. And it's your adventure. And you could blame yourself for it, or you could blame the world for it, but it's yours. And so that's why acceptance of how you feel, which is really acceptance of who you are being in this present moment, is so important. So live your story. The part 3 there, ejected feelings are projected outside the body. These are the feelings that we experience, but you don't want to experience them, so we put them out there in the world. It's called projection. The phenomenon when somebody annoys you, usually it's because you're projecting that they're doing something that's inside of you, and it's kind of like looking in a mirror. You don't want to see that. That's a common thing that we do. So these manifest as our interactions in the world. It could be financial, it could be relational, it could be in our work life. It's whatever shows up, things that get in the way, accidents. This is stuff that we've tried to put out there, but it shows up in our life. In some way it manifests. This is universal law. What I like about these writings from A Course of Love is that they're so specific and they give us a place to look. We can talk about, my thoughts create my life, so I need to change my thoughts. But then where do you start? For me, this gives us a place to start. That it's not really my thoughts where I start, it's my feelings. And I use my thoughts to explore that. And feelings are usually not triggered by a thought. They're triggered by a thought. Yeah, they're not caused by a thought. Already science has proven, through Dr. Benjamin Libet and through other scientists, who've shown that most of our responses are reactions to things. The thought, the decision comes about 0.4 of a second after the emotion's already on its way. And think of the times that you've responded automatically to somebody, like you were defensive or something like that. You didn't even think about it, just the words are popping out of your mouth and you're defending yourself or attacking or whatever, because we are conditioned. And so our conditioning takes over unless you are very aware and you pause. That's the thing that I try to practice because it was so obvious to myself just seeing all my automatic reactions throughout my life that I didn't always like those reactions. They didn't always work very well for me. So I better pause and think for a moment before I open my mouth. But even now, after all this practice, it still happens sometimes. I'm still, okay, wait a minute. And so really, the important thing is, what is the emotional state? Who am I being that's causing me to behave that way and to think this way? In some writings, you learn, and this also I get this from Dr. David Hawkins, is that a lot of your thoughts are not really your thoughts, but they are thoughts that are drawn to you by your emotional state or your vibrational state. And think of the thoughts that you run through your mind every day, and for most of us, 90% of them are the same ones you ran through your mind yesterday. Why are those thoughts still there? You're not really creating them, you're just running them over and over again. And why are they there? Because you have an emotional state that is drawing them to you. And so if you can heal the emotional state, don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about changing your thoughts because they won't be there anymore. I've experienced that. In my younger days, I'm talking maybe 30, 40 years ago, I sometimes could get into a lot of jealous thinking. And that got in the way of my relationships. It got and at that point, in the way of my marriage relationship. So I took a good look at that. And I worked with that, with the feelings that were under there. And I experienced some healing by doing that. And in doing so, those thoughts didn't really come to me anymore. Or if they did, I would just, go away. And they didn't stick because there was no vibrational state there anymore. The reason, whatever the emotional reason for experiencing jealousy was gone, and so I didn't get the thoughts anymore. Or fantasies or whatever. I didn't get that stuff. Does that make sense? So once we heal something emotionally, the thoughts, they're not a problem anymore. No escape. I'm on number 4 on the page there. Whatever feelings you have had in your life that you have repressed or rejected or projected, avoided, there's no escape from them. They're yours. No escape does not mean that anyone is bound to the past or to their former pain, but you are bound to and affected by whatever you've rejected or you've ejected, whatever you've made separate from yourself. You're bound to that. You're not bound to your past. You're bound to how you feel about it. Because subconsciously, you've decided to be bound because you've held on to it. All that has been expelled, whether you've rejected it or projected it out there, all that's been expelled is part of the wholeness of self. And as it became real in our physical life, that is, as it's returned to the self, the physical manifestation dissolves. So if let's say I have a chronic condition in my body, and it comes to me at some point what I'm repressing inside of me, what I've rejected, something that, and I've told stories of myself about this before. Let's say I have this very strong feeling inside of me, and I have had this, that I'm not lovable, that no one would love me. But I'm not even consciously aware that I'm thinking that. In my conscious life, I'm thinking, I've already conquered that. But it's in me. And I can certainly look back at my childhood and see why I feel that way with some of the interactions with my parents. But I don't have to go back to my childhood. I don't have to go through and relive all that stuff. I just have to look at how am I feeling right now? That this feeling of not being loved. So what do I do about that? Accept it. So it means I sit down and I just say, okay, what does it feel like to not be loved? What does that feel like in my body? And let myself feel it. Just sit there and experience it. Breathe with it. Don't feed it with a bunch of thoughts. Don't feed it with drama. Don't go out and act on it, but just sit with it and let it be there. Because apparently, I wanted to experience not being loved in this lifetime. So, okay, I'm going to sit here and not resist it anymore. I'm just going to accept that that's how I'm feeling. And so accept it. I know these feelings aren't true in some part of my mind, but that's okay. I'm still experiencing it. It's still part of me. So I sit with it. I accept it. And at some point, I embrace it. I embrace this feeling inside. Think of it as you have a little child, and the child is sitting there crying, feeling that nobody likes me. You would comfort that child, right? If it were your child. So you're comforting that child in you by surrounding it in love, by embracing it. And it may take several times to go through that, but then as you do that then, you find that the intensity is lessening. So then you might start asking, well, what does it feel like to know that I'm loved? And then generate those feelings. So you make this transition from acceptance and embracing to Well, how do I want to feel? How do I want to experience myself? And you go into that. That's not in this particular chapter, but I wanted to add that because I think it's important. And then you do that, and then you not only think consciously, I'm loved, I'm okay, but you've internalized it. And that's the thing. So many of us, we do affirmations and denials and all those things, and it's mental. We don't really internalize it. I'm talking about how do we internalize it so it's very real to us. And the interesting thing that happened to me when I went through this was that I noticed the different ways that feeling unloved manifested in my life. In my body language, in my voice tone, little subtle things that maybe I'd be standing like this, and if it was triggered in me, that feeling unloved, even though I don't know that that's what's being triggered, that my body language might just shrink a little, and I wouldn't take up as much space standing on the floor. My tone of voice, or I might be defensive. And I noticed those things. So then after that, when I would start to react that way, because it was a habit after many years, I go, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? I don't need to do that. I know that I'm loved. And so then I've just changed it to, in a sense, break the habit. So we make the changes, but our body has habitually reacted in certain ways for many years, and so sometimes that takes a little while, but it's kind of fun to notice that, because I see that, oh, my body's reacting, but I also know inside, even in my body, that that's not true. I don't need to do that. I can consciously say, I don't need to go there. All right, so there's no escape. But through acceptance and embracing what you feel, and I'm paraphrasing number 4, the source of whatever was the problem goes away. And so if the source goes away, then it goes away in the sense that it's not present running you, but it's integrated into the whole self. It just becomes part of the whole self. And the symptoms, though, tend to go away because there's no source anymore. So my symptoms of shrinking my body language or changing my tone of voice, those symptoms went away because I no longer had that feeling inside that I'm not lovable. Does that make sense? And so the same thing can happen with physical symptoms or relationship issues. That once you make the change, that you no longer are in that mindset, you're no longer in that identity, then the symptoms there's no cause for them. There's nothing to keep them going. It says here, because the feeling that generated the physical manifestation was not physical to begin with, was not of the physical world, it returns to the non-physical nature within the spacious self. That's the whole self, your higher self. Thus, it was not escaped, but reintegrated into the oneness of the self. Up above that, a little higher, on that paragraph, illness is no longer observable once what was rejected rejoins the spacious self. So once we integrate, and we all need integration because we have all these conflicts inside of ourselves, all these conflicting emotions. Integration means that they all become as one, and we're not in conflict with ourselves anymore, but we are whole. And to be whole is a good feeling. Part 5, how do feelings of loneliness or despair, anger or grief join with the spacious self? It joins through acceptance. Without acceptance, the separation remains along with the physical manifestation. It is only in the present that acceptance can occur. There's no going back or reliving of the past required. There's also no escape, however, because in Christ consciousness, you must become fully aware of the present. So this is where it takes us to, is for us to become fully aware of the present moment. To not go through your day half asleep, which is what most people do. We go through our day, your mind runs through all its stories, you react the same way you always react to other people, unless you step back and become the observer of yourself and you pay attention to how you feel. You pay attention to how you're acting out of how you feel. And that takes some effort because we're not used to doing it. We're just used to, in a sense, just turning off our consciousness and just going through the day and doing what we do. And in some ways, in some areas, that's fine. Where you're doing a task that doesn't require you to think clearly on it, okay. Maybe when you're playing music, you don't need to be like aware of every word you're saying because it's in you. You know, you've learned it. And so, but you might have an awareness going still of how are people responding to this music? That sort of thing. How does this music make me feel? There might be that kind of awareness there. But you don't have to think about every word. And I'm not saying you have to think about every word during the day, but I think we want to have some care in terms of our words so that whatever emotional states are in us are not being inflicted on other people. So what all this is saying is, as number 6, love yourself enough to accept yourself. Love will transform a normal, ordinary life into an extraordinary life. All those frustrations you currently feel have a purpose. And the purpose is to move you through them and beyond them to acceptance. That's what it's all about. So again, I take us back to Charles Fillmore's quote, "Man's bodily condition depends on his state of mind. Years do not make a man young or old, for as he thinketh within himself, so is he." As you think within yourself, in your subconscious mind mostly, as you feel, that's who you become. So become aware of who you are being at any given moment, accept that, embrace it, and move forward. Thank you, everyone.